I thought that last discussion was very interesting. Broadly, I work in policy world, and in the policy world, which is what I want to talk about, you people haven't been very helpful. I say that nicely, I hope. I mean, because broadly, the picture it's been given in policy to policymakers has been of what loosely one could call the mismatch theory. Structural imbalance, energy balance story. Okay, the metabolic perturbation is coming in. There's some very interesting studies. I like that first talk very much. But still broadly, the picture that is coming out of obesity studies and NCDs is of mismatch. The food supply is overproducing. There is a massive overproduction of food in calorific terms. A distortion of who gets it. The rich get it because of market reasons, both within the rich world and indeed within the developing and the poor world. Within low income and in high income, we see the same socioeconomic gradients, but with very different effects, as Amina's nice talk reminded us. The problem is, this is a classic situation of where the scientists have given the policymakers who have very short attention spans. Let me choose my words carefully. Given a very complex, not a contradictory for once, a very complex picture. I was one of the people who worked on that, what I fondly call the spaghetti model. And we were trying to make sense of it, actually. Amina put up version 4, where some little dots were clustering factors. And then it went even harder, actually. The lines went very dark indeed, if you go and look at the Foresight report, which is still worth looking at. But the problem is that that then didn't get translated into policy. So here was the biggest exercise the British state has ever done on any public health problem outside the Second World War, and where some notional coherence was coming from science to policy makers via the chief scientific advisor, reporting through and to 3, not 1, 3 ministers and the Food Standards Agency. This was as good as you can get in the policy world, where you're lucky if you get 3 minutes with a minister, let alone 2 years with 4. Okay? This is golden era. And actually where we failed was getting the follow-up, because what happened was it was translated into the biggest exercise the British state has done on obesity. 2/3 of £1 billion. That's a lot of money. Okay, it's not as much money as is spent on the National Health Service, but it's still a lot of money in terms of health education. 10 years ago was getting £5 million a year, suddenly getting £600 million. And experiments set up like the Healthy Cities Project, 8 cities healthy localities. And against my strong professional and indeed personal wishes, ludicrous amounts of money of that 600 million were thrown at the Change for Life sort of cartoon show, he says quietly. So we have a very sober situation. I approach this, I'm reflecting on my life, frankly. We've spent a lot of time, this building and countless other academic buildings, producing evidence, producing data, producing analyses of the state of the food system, of the relationship between the food system and public health, the relationship between the food system and environment, ecosystems as well as built environments. We're in concrete here. There's nothing natural to be seen anywhere. Even the carpet is plastic oil. Okay. Probably I and you are the only bits that resemble anything living, we hope. So the questions I'm asking myself now are, have we drowned in our own complexity, or have we failed to translate the complexity? That I'm beginning to wonder. I'm looking at my friends Tim and Aubrey, because this is an old argument. I wrote down, what are the factors that one would approach a policymaker? Well, it's costing a lot. The supply chains are very powerful. There's an overproduction problem. Not in Britain. Actually, you look at the British figures, Britain is only producing 60% of all the food that it consumes. So there's a great post-imperialist sucking sound, actually, as the British consume other people's land, other people's labor. And if you say, well, I'm only going to eat British fruit and vegetables, well, you're hard-pressed, actually, because there's only 10% of fruit that the British consume, and it's not enough, according to you people. Only 10% of it comes from British orchards. Vegetables, 50%. But if you get that, it's foreign labor, migrant labor, badly paid, which is picking it. So what's the way in here? Land use. We've invested for 70 years in the motorway, motor car infrastructure, not in the bicycle infrastructure. We've, the Egger and Swinburne argument, I think, is still a very good one. The physiological response is the correct response to an inappropriate environment. Now that ministers get, and they got it instantly. The problem is, they would say, you mean you want to go against cars? Yes. And immediately then, you're just out of the door. So you're in a pecking order of what is effective at winning things. Cars, Britain churns out 2 million cars a year. 2 million cars a year are made in Britain. I think it's only, well, not even Rolls-Royce are British owned, but they're cited here. No, they're not. I actually arrived, there's another Brompton there. They procreate Bromptons if you put them together in a dark room. The Brompton over there is, I think, the only bicycle made in Britain, and even that, the gears come from Taiwan. I'm not a little Englander, by the way. The main problem, if you speak to ministers, that they get is ecosystems. They do get that, actually. Well, they did until 2010. The demographics of this, they get instantly. But it's been turned into blaming the poor for being fat. And that's a really tricky one. And that, by the way, is when the present government was cutting the British state, which is done very successfully. It didn't cut Change for Life because it was seen and argued for that it was targeting the hard to reach, the fat poor. Now, this I find very tricky indeed. So the messages that we've got, when you translate them to policymakers, which is what I was asked to speak about, by the way, are quite tricky. And yet, my third point I write here is that I still feel, coming from the 20 to 30 years of scientific data and research work around the world, not just in Britain. I've been focusing on Britain, but I'm an internationalist. The consensus has been actually that what we've failed to do is join it up. We haven't put all of that. We've had scientists competing for explanatory power and not actually working. There was a danger with you two previous speakers. There was a sort of a little subtext of academic interest of setting you against each other. This is stupid. Not that you were doing that, of course. My point is that the policy responses are weak. They're smiling, by the way, in case you think I was getting them.
Everything's fine.
They're absolutely. The policy responses were weak. And yet we had £600 million, a huge amount of money. And it needs to be written up, actually. You said very nice things about me something in your PhD, I hope, positive. You know, we actually need to learn the lessons from these. What's gone wrong with that huge amount of money? Why has it worked out so badly? Why has it just been a derived cartoon targeting the fat poor? This is a policy failure. But I do want to echo what both the other speakers in different ways have said on one front, which is that never should we underestimate the strong interests against us doing anything. If we really wanted to alter obesity levels in a country like Britain, the 6th richest economy on the planet, you would actually have to change the system. I've written down here, my point 4 is the classic policy problem we're in, as of systemic change is what the data points to. Whereas in fact, even 600 million pounds, can I now say, is peanuts to the 190 billion pounds spent every year in the British food system. It's tiny, and that 600 million was across 3 years. So it's 200 million doing little interventions relatively on a systemic problem. The institutional leverage, whichever way we look at it, at the global level or if at the national level, can't quite cope with this. I'm a UN watcher, been a consultant to bits of the UN. Some of you are and have been and will be too. The difficulty is the UN it claims itself to be a family of bodies. It isn't. It's actually an internal competition. FAO is much more powerful, bigger budget than the WHO. At the ICN2, the International Conference on Nutrition #2, which meets in November this year in Rome, it's the reconvening of 1992's first International Conference on Nutrition. The very connection between environment and nutrition has been ruled off the agenda. And yet that was the origins in 1992 of the juxtaposition of ICN1 and UN Conference on Environment and Development. 22 years later, we have not persuaded the UN to integrate its thinking. Now you come to Britain. I've written, it's a shame here I don't have a PowerPoint actually, because in the National Audit Office in 2001 did the first data showing the cost of obesity. It led then to the Chief Medical Officer of England, not Wales or Scotland, so already we're fragmenting, of England to say obesity is a time bomb, which then spawned the Select Committee, Health Select Committee, to do the biggest inquiry it's ever done in 35 years of its existence, which was on obesity. It took 2 years. I was one of the advisors. Phil James was another. 4 of us were. Which said strong words, silence. Then the chief scientist picked it up with the Foresight report that we saw, the spaghetti model, 2006 to 8, then silence again for 9 months, then nirvana. We had actually worked very hard on the ministers, and those 3 to 4 ministers came together, and healthy weight, healthy lives was put. I'm finishing. And then it ended with an election. And then we got the responsibility deal, which has turned us back. So we've had 14 years where we've ended up actually in a thinner policy level than where we started. And yet, and I end with this, I am actually optimistic, believe it or not, because I think in this process of the last 15 years, if we look at Britain, if at the global level it's slightly longer, in different countries, not dissimilar processes have happened, where the global picture has been translated into the local and national, and a process of what I've written, my 5th point is, there's bubbling experimentation. That is actually where we are in the policy terms. And some of us are now looking at inverting the classic public health view, that policy should be evidence-based, like medicine should be evidence-based. I think we've got to turn it round the other way and say what evidence would make a difference to policymakers. So policy-based evidence is not necessarily the same as evidence-based policy. So to summarize, Of course, more research is needed. Of course, more structural arguments are needed between the different models and so on. But I think, I don't hear anyone saying to the contrary, we have enough evidence to act. Put it this way, the costs are big and mounting. And it's very interesting, by the way. We are always told, if you cost it, the treasuries will get interested. We've costed it, and the treasuries still aren't interested. So listen to that evidence. I think ultimately it is back to some very gloomy and sober, but also positive thinking, which is this will probably only get dealt with in shock or crises. Oil is the most obvious one, which will transform behavior. It'll certainly alter the food system. The food system is the most oil dependent of all sectors except the car industry. So I think we have lots to learn about policy, but it's not necessarily what we want to hear. That's it.